There's something deeply human about the longing for justice. Not the loud, performative kind we see in the world, but the quiet, aching desire to know that what is right will ultimately prevail. Many of us carry wounds, moments where we were overlooked, mistreated, or broken by forces beyond our control. And in those moments, the question rises from somewhere deep within: does justice truly exist? And if it does, when will it find me? The illusion of immediate success is one of the most powerful deceptions we encounter, especially when we look at the world around us and measure outcomes through what is visible and immediate. It is easy to assume that those who act unjustly, who cut corners, or who harm others somehow gain an advantage that is both real and lasting. This perception does not just stay in the mind, it settles into the heart, shaping emotions, influencing decisions, and quietly eroding trust in what is right. When success is defined only by speed, wealth, recognition, or power, it creates a distorted lens through which we begin to interpret reality. Psalm 37 challenges this distortion by asking us to reconsider what success actually means and how it unfolds over time. The human tendency is to compare timelines, to look at someone else's apparent progress and feel left behind. In that comparison, there is often a subtle but dangerous shift, one where integrity starts to feel like a disadvantage rather than a strength. The illusion grows stronger when wrong actions appear to produce quick rewards, while patience, honesty, and faith seem to take longer to bear fruit. This is where the internal struggle begins, not just with others, but within ourselves. At its core, this illusion feeds on our discomfort with waiting. Waiting exposes vulnerability because it forces us to sit with uncertainty and unanswered questions. It brings to the surface fears that perhaps justice will never come, that perhaps doing the right thing does not truly matter in a world that seems to reward the opposite. These fears are deeply human, and they often arise from past experiences where fairness was absent or delayed. The mind tries to protect itself by drawing conclusions based on what it can immediately observe, even if those conclusions are incomplete or misleading. What Psalm 37 reveals is that what appears to be success in the moment is often temporary, fragile, and lacking true foundation. Immediate success can be loud and visible, but it is not necessarily stable. It does not always reflect inner peace, alignment, or lasting fulfillment. In contrast, the path of righteousness is often quieter and less noticeable at first, but it carries a depth that is not easily shaken. This does not mean the journey is easy or free from struggle. In fact, it often requires enduring moments where nothing seems to be changing, where effort feels unseen, and where doubt begins to whisper. The illusion also thrives on selective attention. We tend to notice the moments where injustice seems to win, while overlooking the longer narrative where consequences unfold more gradually. Human perception is naturally drawn to what is dramatic and immediate, making it harder to appreciate the slower, more subtle processes at work. This creates a fragmented understanding of reality, one that reinforces the belief that quick success is the ultimate goal and that anything slower is a sign of failure. Breaking free from this illusion requires a shift not just in thinking but in perspective. It involves recognizing that timelines are not always visible, that outcomes are not always immediate, and that the value of a path cannot be measured solely by its speed. It calls for a deeper trust in a process that unfolds beyond what can be seen in the present moment. This trust does not eliminate discomfort, but it changes the way discomfort is experienced. Instead of interpreting delay as denial, it becomes possible to see it as part of a larger unfolding that is not yet complete. In this way, the illusion of immediate success begins to lose its grip. It no longer dictates self-worth or determines the direction of one's choices. Instead, there is a gradual return to a steadier foundation, one where actions are guided not by comparison or urgency, but by a deeper alignment with what is right. Even when the results are not immediately visible, the inner battle between trust and envy is often subtle yet deeply shaping. It does not always announce itself loudly. Instead, it unfolds quietly within the mind and heart, especially in moments when we observe others seeming to thrive in ways we desire. Trust calls us to remain grounded, to believe that what is meant for us will come in its time, and that there is a deeper order beyond what we immediately see. Envy, on the other hand, pulls our attention outward, comparing, questioning, and slowly planting seeds of dissatisfaction. This tension becomes more intense when life feels unfair. When we see people who act unjustly appearing to succeed, or when our own efforts seem unnoticed or delayed, something within us begins to stir. Trust starts to feel fragile, almost naive, while envy begins to feel justified. It tells a convincing story that perhaps we are missing out, that perhaps the path of integrity is costing us more than it is giving. These thoughts do not arise because we are flawed. They arise because we are human, shaped by experiences that have taught us to seek security, recognition, and fairness. Envy often disguises itself as awareness. It makes us hyper-conscious of what others have, how quickly they achieve it, and how their lives seem to unfold with ease. In doing so, it narrows our vision. Instead of seeing the full picture, we begin to focus only on fragments of moments of success without context, outcomes without the processes that led to them. This selective focus intensifies the feeling of lack, making it harder to appreciate our own journey. Trust, in contrast, requires a wider lens. It asks us to step back from comparison and to reconnect with our own path, even when that path feels uncertain or slow. There is also a protective function in envy that is worth understanding. Sometimes it arises not just from wanting what others have, but from a deeper fear that we may never receive what we need or hope for. In this sense, envy is less about others and more about our own unmet needs and unhealed wounds. It points to areas where we feel deprived, overlooked, or unseen. Trust does not ignore these feelings. It invites us to face them honestly, without letting them dictate our actions. The battle between trust and envy is not something that is resolved once and for all. It is ongoing, shifting with circumstances and internal states. There are moments when trust feels strong, when we are aligned with patience and clarity. And there are moments when envy quietly takes hold, influencing how we interpret what we see. What matters is not the absence of envy, but how we respond to it when it arises. Do we allow it to reshape our values, or do we use it as a signal to return to what we know is right? Psalm 37 gently guides this inner conflict by encouraging a posture of trust that is active rather than passive. It is not about ignoring reality or pretending that injustice does not exist. It is about choosing not to let comparison and resentment take root in a way that distorts our perspective. Trust, in this sense, becomes a deliberate orientation, a decision to remain anchored in something deeper than immediate appearances. Over time, this choice begins to transform the inner landscape. The pull of envy may still appear, but it loses some of its intensity. It becomes easier to observe it without being consumed by it, to recognize it as a passing state rather than a defining truth. Trust, though quieter, begins to feel more stable, less dependent on external validation. It allows space for patience, for growth, and for a kind of peace that is not constantly disrupted by comparison. Waiting without bitterness is one of the most demanding inner disciplines a person can face. Waiting by itself is already uncomfortable. It stretches time, exposes uncertainty, and often leaves questions unanswered. But when waiting is combined with perceived injustice, disappointment, or delay, it can easily give rise to bitterness, a slow, corrosive emotion that reshapes how we see others, ourselves, and even God. What begins as patience can quietly turn into resentment if it is not held with awareness. Bitterness does not usually appear all at once. It builds gradually, layer by layer, often unnoticed at first. It may begin with a simple thought, asterisk, this isn't fair. Asterisk, over time, that thought can evolve into something heavier, something that lingers beneath the surface. It can influence tone, reactions, and even the way we interpret neutral situations. Waiting becomes more than a passage of time. It becomes a burden, a weight carried internally. Longer the wait, the more opportunities there are for bitterness to take root. At the heart of bitterness is a sense of unresolved pain. It reflects moments where expectations were not met, where efforts did not yield the hoped-for outcomes, or where justice seemed absent. These experiences leave an imprint, and when they are revisited repeatedly during periods of waiting, they can deepen emotional wounds. The mind often tries to make sense of this by assigning blame, sometimes outward, sometimes inward. In either case, the result is a tightening of the inner world, a closing off that makes it harder to remain open, patient, and trusting. Waiting without bitterness requires a different kind of engagement with time. It is not passive endurance, nor is it denial of what one feels. It is an active process of noticing what arises internally and choosing how to relate to it. When frustration surfaces, it is acknowledged rather than suppressed. When disappointment appears, it is allowed to be felt without turning into a fixed narrative of hopelessness. This approach does not eliminate discomfort, but it prevents that discomfort from hardening into something more rigid and destructive. There is also an element of surrender involved, though not in the sense of giving up. It is a surrender of the need to control outcomes or timelines, an acceptance that not everything can be forced into resolution according to personal expectations. This can feel deeply unsettling, especially in a world that often emphasizes control, speed, and immediate results. Yet within this surrender, there is a subtle shift. The focus moves from when will this end to how am I being shaped through this process. Waiting becomes less about the external delay and more about the internal transformation that is taking place. Bitterness tends to narrow perspective, making everything feel more confined and personal. It can create a sense that the delay or injustice is directed specifically at us, reinforcing feelings of isolation or unfairness. Waiting without bitterness, in contrast, allows for a broader view. It recognizes that life unfolds in complex ways, that timing is not always visible, and that growth often occurs in spaces that are not immediately rewarding. This broader perspective does not erase the difficulty of waiting, but it changes the way that difficulty is held. There is also a quiet strength in choosing not to become bitter. It is a form of resilience that is not always visible from the outside, but is deeply significant internally. It preserves clarity, keeps the heart from becoming hardened, and maintains the capacity for trust and openness. This does not mean that one never feels anger or frustration. These emotions can still arise, but they are not allowed to settle into a permanent state. They pass through rather than take hold. Over time, waiting without bitterness begins to create a different relationship with uncertainty. Instead of being something that must be escaped or resolved immediately, uncertainty becomes something that can be lived with, even if imperfectly. The urgency softens, and in its place there is a steadier presence. This presence does not demand immediate answers, nor does it collapse under the weight of delay. It continues forward quietly, holding both the tension of waiting and the possibility that something meaningful is still unfolding beneath the surface. Letting go of control and embracing faith is not a simple emotional shift. It is a deep internal reorientation that challenges one of the most instinctive human tendencies, the need to manage outcomes. Control often gives a sense of safety. It creates the illusion that if we plan carefully enough, act precisely enough, and anticipate every possibility, we can prevent pain, delay, or disappointment. But life consistently reveals the limits of that belief. Situations arise that cannot be predicted, outcomes that cannot be forced, and timelines that refuse to align with personal expectations. When control begins to slip, discomfort surfaces quickly. There is a feeling of instability, as if something essential is being lost. This reaction is not weakness, it is a reflection of how deeply the need for certainty is rooted within us. Control becomes a way of coping with uncertainty, a strategy developed over time to reduce anxiety and create structure. Yet when this strategy becomes rigid, it can lead to exhaustion. The constant effort to manage everything externally and internally drains energy and often leads to frustration when results do not match intentions. Psalm 37 introduces a different approach, one that does not deny the reality of uncertainty but invites a different relationship with it. Letting go of control in this sense does not mean becoming passive or disengaged. It means recognizing the boundary between what can be influenced and what cannot. It involves releasing the need to dictate every outcome while still remaining responsible for one's actions and choices. This distinction is subtle but essential. Without it, letting go can be misunderstood as indifference, when in reality it is a form of clarity. Faith enters this space not as blind belief, but as a grounded trust in something beyond immediate visibility. It is not about ignoring difficulty or pretending that everything will unfold easily. Instead, it is about holding on to a deeper sense of order even when circumstances feel chaotic. This kind of faith does not eliminate questions or doubts, it allows them to exist without letting them dominate the entire experience. It creates room for uncertainty without collapsing into fear. There is often a period of tension between holding on and letting go. In this space, the mind may repeatedly return to attempts at control, replaying scenarios, trying to predict outcomes, or searching for ways to regain certainty. This back and forth can feel exhausting, as if one part of the self is trying to release, while another part is tightening its grip. Understanding this tension is important because it reveals that letting go is not a single decision but an ongoing process. Each moment presents a new opportunity to either cling or release. As control begins to loosen, something unexpected can emerge: a sense of relief. Not because all problems are solved, but because the burden of carrying everything alone begins to lift. There is a shift from constant effort to a more balanced state, where action is still taken, but without the same level of internal pressure. Decisions become less about forcing specific outcomes and more about aligning with what feels right and true in the present moment. Embracing faith also changes the way setbacks are experienced. When control is the primary focus, setbacks can feel like failures, evidence that something has gone wrong or that efforts were insufficient. With faith, setbacks are not necessarily seen as final conclusions. They become part of a larger process, moments that may hold meaning or direction that is not immediately clear. This perspective does not remove disappointment, but it prevents disappointment from turning into defeat. Over time, this combination of letting go and trusting more deeply reshapes the internal landscape. There is less urgency to control every detail, less fear of what cannot be predicted. In its place, there is a quieter confidence, not in the certainty of outcomes, but in the ability to navigate whatever unfolds. This confidence is not loud or forceful. It is steady, rooted in the understanding that while control has its limits, faith can extend beyond those limits. Holding space for possibilities that cannot yet be seen, the quiet power of righteous living is often overlooked in a world that measures strength through visibility, speed, and external success. Righteousness, as reflected in Psalm 37, does not announce itself loudly or demand recognition. It operates beneath the surface, shaping character, guiding decisions, and influencing the way a person moves through life even when no one is watching. This kind of power is not immediately noticeable, which is why it is frequently underestimated. There is a natural human inclination to associate power with dominance or control. We are conditioned to believe that influence must be seen to be real, that impact must be immediate to be meaningful. Righteous living challenges this assumption by presenting a form of strength that is steady rather than forceful. It is expressed through consistency, integrity, and a commitment to what is right regardless of external outcomes. This kind of strength does not fluctuate with circumstances. It remains grounded even when situations become uncertain or difficult. Living righteously often requires making choices that do not provide instant rewards. It may involve turning away from opportunities that promise quick gain but compromise deeper values. It may mean responding with patience when anger feels justified or choosing honesty when deception appears easier. These decisions can feel costly in the moment, especially when others seem to benefit from taking a different path. The tension lies in acting according to principles that may not yield visible results right away. This is where the quiet power begins to take shape. Each decision aligned with righteousness reinforces an internal structure, a kind of moral and emotional stability that cannot be easily shaken. Over time, this stability becomes a foundation that supports clarity, resilience, and a sense of direction. It allows a person to navigate challenges without being pulled in every direction by external pressures. While the results may not be immediately visible, the internal transformation is significant. There is also an aspect of trust embedded in righteous living. It requires believing that what is right has value beyond immediate outcomes, that integrity is not wasted even when it is not rewarded in obvious ways. Trust can be difficult to maintain, particularly in environments where shortcuts and compromises are normalized. It asks for a longer view, one that considers not just the present moment, but the broader arc of life. This perspective does not guarantee ease, but it provides a sense of coherence that is often missing when actions are driven solely by convenience or gain. The quiet nature of this power can sometimes lead to feelings of invisibility. When efforts go unnoticed or unacknowledged, it is easy to question whether they matter. This is a critical point of tension because it tests the depth of one's commitment. Is righteousness dependent on recognition, or does it hold value in itself? Psalm 37 suggests that its value is intrinsic, not contingent on immediate validation. This does not diminish the human desire to be seen, but it invites a deeper understanding of where true worth is found. Another dimension of this quiet power is its influence on others. While it may not be Immediately apparent, consistent righteous behavior creates a kind of ripple effect. It sets a standard, offers an alternative, and sometimes challenges others to reflect on their own choices. This influence is not imposed, it emerges naturally over time. It may not lead to widespread change, but it can impact individuals in meaningful ways, often without direct intention. There is also a sense of alignment that develops through righteous living. Actions, values, and inner beliefs begin to move in the same direction, reducing internal conflict. This alignment brings a form of peace that is not dependent on external circumstances. It allows for a steadiness that remains even when outcomes are uncertain or delayed. This peace is not the absence of struggle, but the presence of coherence within that struggle. In this way, the power of righteousness is not measured by how quickly it produces results, but by how deeply it transforms the one who lives by it. It shapes perception, strengthens character, and creates a foundation that endures beyond temporary conditions. It may not draw attention, but it carries a weight that is both real and lasting, influencing not just outcomes, but the very way life is experienced from within. Justice as a process, not an event, challenges one of the most deeply ingrained expectations we carry: the desire for resolution to be immediate, visible, and final. When we think of justice, we often imagine a decisive moment where wrongs are corrected, truth is revealed, and everything is set right at once. This expectation is understandable, especially in the face of pain or Arabic meme, where the heart longs for clarity and closure. But Psalm 37 invites a different understanding, one that unfolds over time rather than arriving in a single dramatic instance. Seeing justice as a process requires a shift in how we interpret what is happening around us. It asks us to move beyond snapshots of the present moment and consider a longer narrative. What appears unresolved today may still be part of something that is unfolding beneath the surface. This does not mean ignoring injustice or dismissing the reality of harm. Instead, it means recognizing that outcomes are not always immediate, and that the absence of visible resolution does not necessarily indicate the absence of justice itself. There is a certain discomfort in this perspective because it removes the certainty of timelines. When justice is seen as an event, there is an expectation attached to when it should occur. When that expectation is not met, it can lead to frustration, doubt, and even disillusionment. The mind begins to question whether fairness truly exists, or whether it is simply an idea we hold on to for comfort. This is where the deeper work begins, not in finding quick answers, but in learning to remain steady within the uncertainty. A process-oriented view of justice also highlights the complexity of life. Actions have consequences, but those consequences do not always appear in straightforward ways. They may unfold gradually, intersecting with other factors, influencing outcomes over time rather than all at once. This complexity can be difficult to accept because it does not provide the clean, immediate resolution we often desire. It requires patience, not as passive waiting, but as an active willingness to allow things to develop without forcing them into a predetermined shape. There is also an internal dimension to this process. Justice is not only about what happens externally, it also involves what takes place within a person. The way one responds to Arabic meme, the choices made in difficult circumstances, and the ability to remain aligned with what is right all form part of this unfolding. In this sense, justice is not only something that is delivered, it is something that is lived. It shapes character, influences perspective, and contributes to a deeper understanding of right and wrong beyond surface-level outcomes. Trust plays a significant role in holding on to this view. Without trust, the idea of justice as a process can feel unsettling, even discouraging. It can seem as though wrongs are being allowed to continue unchecked. Trust does not remove this tension, but it provides a way to stay grounded within it. It allows for the possibility that there are dimensions of justice that are not immediately visible, that there is an order that extends beyond what can be observed in the present moment. Over time, this perspective begins to change the way events are interpreted. Instead of seeking immediate conclusions, there is a greater openness to unfolding outcomes. Situations are not rushed into judgment, and there is less urgency to define everything as resolved or unresolved in the moment. This does not eliminate the desire for justice, but it reshapes how that desire is held. It becomes less about demanding instant answers and more about remaining aligned with truth while allowing the process to continue. This approach also reduces the emotional volatility that often accompanies unmet expectations. When justice is tied to a specific moment, delays can feel like failures. When it is understood as a process, delays are not necessarily negative, they become part of the unfolding itself. This shift does not make injustice acceptable, but it creates space for a steadier response, one that is not constantly destabilized by what has not yet happened. In this way, justice moves from being a single point of resolution to a dynamic, ongoing reality. It continues to unfold across time, within circumstances, and through the choices people make each day. It is not always visible, not always immediate, but it remains in motion, shaping outcomes in ways that are often only understood in hindsight.